I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Albert Magalang. I'm working with the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources here in the Philippines. We call that DNR, or the department. I'm also directly connected with the Climate Change Office of the ministry, and I am a co-representative as the national focal point for the AWGCC, together with my Director William Cuñado. Thanks again. Once again, good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. And next on the list is Ariel from the RCC Bangkok. Please allow me to go really alphabetically through the list. That's the only way of doing it. So, Ariel.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Ariel. I work for RCC Bangkok. Very nice to meet you virtually.
Thank you, Ariel. ASEAN Secretariat, Lee Fong Tao.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lee Fong Tao from the ASEAN Secretariat. I'm currently with the Environment Division. It's nice to meet you all, and I hope our webinar will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you again, ASEAN Secretary Natalia Derodova.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Natalia Derodova. I'm also from the Environment Division. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Tri, ASEAN Secretariat.
Good afternoon. This is Tri from Environment Division of the ASEAN Secretariat. Looking forward for today's discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Fong Sok, ASEAN Secretariat.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, the team, and good afternoon, everyone. So Wong Sok from ASEAN Secretariat. Nice to see you all, and looking forward for the discussion on the finding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next from Myanmar, Aung Thu Han. If you like to open your camera very briefly. Aung Thu Han.
Hello, Jan.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. This is Aung Thu Han from Myanmar, working for Environment and Conservation Department. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bjorn Fonden, RCC.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. This is Bjorn Fonden. I am working for the RCC Bangkok together with Jens and the team. So very nice to meet you all, and looking forward to a great webinar.
Thank you. Ed Tongson. Ed, can you hear me? Okay. Then, sorry, I can't hear you. Moving on to Federica Chiappe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Federica Chiappe. I'm part of the technical team, and yeah, really good to see you all.
Thank you very much. Now, colleagues from UNFCCC, I see the Skype room. Maybe if you want to all introduce yourself, being in the Skype room. Cannot hear you. Still muted. Maybe getting back to you later. Then we have Kathleen An.
Hi everyone, I'm Kat Cabalies. I'm the Climate Change and Energy Attaché at the British Embassy Manila. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Koji Fukuda.
Okay, sorry everyone. My name is Koji from JICA based in Bangkok. I'm currently serving as a Chief Advisor for Technical Assistance Project with TGO. And I think I met many of you in Quezon City workshop last October and other occasions. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Koji. Leonie?
Hi, everyone. Leonie, working for the UNFCCC, supporting also the MBF projects.
Thank you, Leonie. Long Sok Sim?
Hi, I'm Soksim from Central Bank of Malaysia. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you. Kathy?
Hi, my name is Kathy. I'm from the secretariat and I'm supporting the team for this NBF project. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have a participant named Enverdot. That's...
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Noel Verdote. I'm affiliated with the Association of Development Financing Institutions in Asia and the Pacific. I was there in last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then from the Philippines, Gia Ibay.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Gia Ibay. I am from the I had a climate and energy program from WWF Philippines.
Thank you. Rohaya, Singapore.
Hello. Hi everyone. Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Rohaya from Resource Conservation Department of the National Environment Agency, Singapore.
Thank you, Rohaya. Sodamini.
Hello everyone, this is Sadamini. I support the Regional Collaboration Center in Bangkok. It's nice to see everyone again.
Thank you, Sodamini. Tony from Singapore.
Hello, hi everybody. Good afternoon. Tony from Singapore National Environment Agency. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you, Tony. And we have Sheila from Malaysia.
Hello everyone. I'm Sheila from the Division of Climate Change, Ministry of Environment and Water, Malaysia. With me is my supervisor, Puan Marhani.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And we had seen you already, but Sofina and Rosalind from Brunei. You probably want to skip because we had seen you already. And Sunti from Cambodia.
Good afternoon, everybody. Colleagues, nice to see you. I'm from Cambodia, from Ministry of Environment. Nice to meet you, and we look forward to further discussion on finance need for ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, we had a brief introduction of all participants, and I would like to hand over then to the main presentation. I think it's nice to briefly have heard and seen everyone. With this, I'd like to hand over to my colleagues from the UNFCCC. Maybe you would also introduce yourself briefly. And Yolando, I think we'll start. The floor is yours for the presentation.
Thanks, Jens, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Yolando Velasco. I manage the climate finance team, and I met most of you in Manila during the workshop and in other events in the region. And later on, when I hand over to Grant, I'll ask him to introduce himself. But just quickly, just to go through the presentations. So the objective of this webinar and the presentation is just to run you through the technical assessment, the draft technical assessment of climate finance in Southeast Asia, which we hope will serve as the basis for the development of the ASEAN Climate Finance Mobilization and Access Strategy. Next, Jens. The presentation will follow the different chapters of the technical paper. So introduction, the regional context, the flows, needs and priorities, sources, financial and monetary instruments and mechanisms. We excluded the framework for the strategy, given that the strategy itself will be based, or the elements of the strategy will be based on your discussions with regards to the flows, the priorities, and possible sources of finance. Next, Jens. Just to go through the introduction, in terms of the mandate and aims of the project and the technical paper itself. Next slide, please.
Sorry, it's blank on my screen. Just a second. I hope that it can be done. Moment.
Okay. So the COP and the CMP mandated the Secretariat to assist developing countries in terms of assessing the needs and also catalyzing finance and investments to support those priority actions. Thus, the Needs-based Finance Project was implemented by the Secretariat, and as Albert mentioned, since 2017. And this is being implemented in different regions across developing countries, Asia, the Pacific, Africa, Latin America, and now we are also introducing this in Central Asia. The project itself was endorsed by AWGCC and ASEAN in 2019, with Brunei and the Philippines co-leading the implementation of this project. And from the support side, the UNFCCC Secretariat, together with the ASEAN Secretariat and ESCAP, are working in terms of supporting the AWGCC in pursuing the objectives of this project. And hopefully at the end, in terms of the mobilization of climate finance. So there are three activities, major activities around this project: assessment of flows and needs at the regional level. So this is the technical paper that we are preparing, development of the strategy, and finally the mobilization of climate finance. Next, please. In terms of the methodologies, so we are working on the technical assessment, and that's the one that you've received as a draft, which is aimed at informing and facilitating the development of the strategy by assessing both the supply of and demand for climate finance. We hope that the technical assessment will be able to provide evidence-based framework for the strategy that the ASEAN will later on adopt. Next, please. In terms of approaches for the assessment itself, the technical paper, is that we basically looked into existing materials, available information as sources, both official information provided by the countries to the Secretariat, and also the country reports being generated by countries, the MDB strategies and programs, and the national country strategies. We are assessing both country and regional climate flows and priorities to be able to come up with an understanding of the supply and demand of climate finance. We envisioned an all-inclusive process, including stakeholder consultation. So hopefully this will be part of a series of targeted discussions with you and with the key stakeholders in the region in terms of understanding the flows and understanding where the priorities are. We hope also that the strategy will be endorsed at the highest political level to ensure ownership by the ASEAN of the strategy, and later on in terms of the mobilization of finance. And in particular, the project will look into different instruments, bankable project pipelines, and facilitate the delivery of finance later on by catalyzing both public-private finance at the international and domestic level. As I mentioned earlier, that we are not producing new data. The data that we are presenting to you are available and existing. Thus, what we are doing is basically aggregating both quantitative and qualitative data by doing desk-based assessment, engagement with the stakeholders, and guided by us in the secretariat. As I mentioned earlier, that this project encompasses Southeast Asia. It covers all the developing country regions in the world, so that later on we are able to have comparability in terms of, and consistency in terms of methodologies, and hopefully the outcomes of this project. Next, please. Now going through the regional context. In terms of the socioeconomic and climate context, next please. The combined GDP of ASEAN is about 2.6 trillion, with growth of 5.3 on a year-on-year basis. Total merchandise trade is at 2.5 trillion in 2017 and 135.6 billion FDI flows in 2017. And it has the world's third largest labor force, next to India and China, which is currently stands at about 600 million people in the labor force. And effort by ASEAN for economic integration is expected to lead to about 7% growth by 2025 and an additional 14 million new jobs. In terms of the efforts by the ASEAN region in addressing energy intensity, the target is 20% by this year and 30% by 2025. This is probably something that we hope that one of the regional centers or the ASEAN Secretariat may have information in terms of the status of the implementation of these targets. With an aspirational target of 23% of renewable energy share in the ASEAN energy mix also by 2025. In terms of vulnerability, 6 out of 20 countries in the world that are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are in Southeast Asia. And the expected annual mean temperature by 2100 due to climate change is about 4.8 degrees centigrade from 1990 as the base year. And also an expected 70 centimeters increase in the sea level rise by that period. So overall, the record number of tropical cyclones and flooding in the region have risen dramatically over the years. Next, please. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, total emission level of the region is about 3.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, mainly from energy. And you would have a group of countries that are net emitters, and also a group of countries that are net sink due to contribution by LULUCF. And you have in front of you the table that reflects emissions without LULUCF. Again, mainly from the energy sector, and also you have emissions with LULUCF, and you can see there some of the net sink countries. So overall, the emissions in the region have increased by about 5% per year. Next, please. At the next slide. Looking at the institutional arrangements in the region, all countries have varying level of institutional arrangements to respond to climate change. So you would see there committees, councils, commissions, and different arrangements within the country in terms of the mandates of different of these institutions. Some of them are directly under the executive office. Others are autonomous, independent institutions that implement the policies of the government with regards to the climate change, implement and also develop the plans. Along with this, in this chapter on the regional context, we've also outlined or mapped out the different climate change policies that the countries in the region have adopted over the years. Some have renewable energy laws in place, climate change legislations, or climate-related policies with regards to agriculture, forestry, water, and others. So, and we've grouped them in terms of the priorities of the region with regards to addressing climate change. Something that needs to be pointed out also, if you notice that in the draft technical assessment, we've indicated areas where additional information will be needed. And in the case of the regional context, we've indicated that we will expand, for example, information with regards to export-import data to be added here. These are data that later on we hope would provide links to the needs and priorities of the region. Also, for example, in terms of the climate impact, while we've indicated that the changes in temperature will have impact to the agriculture sector, we were not able to provide more additional data with regards to details with regards to the specific crops, agricultural areas that will be impacted by climate change. And these are, again, as I mentioned, will will be areas for additional information in the future revisions of the draft. With that, I'll hand over to Federica for the next two chapters of the draft report. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Yolanda, for this. So this this section covers an assessment of the existing sources and flows of finance to the region. And if we can go to the next slide and skip this and go to the next one, please. Great, thank you. So Southeast Asia remains the principal region of international public finance flows. It is sort of overall well known that there's numerous sources of finance. These sources of finance are international public finance, which originate from bilateral, multilateral, and climate funds. International private climate finance, so financing from a number of financial investors, in addition to project developers and corporations, and a multitude of domestically sourced public and private finance, so ranging from governmental sources, both at the government, sort of at the national and subnational levels, through domestic banking systems all the way to households. These sources of finance sort of come in the form of different assets and instruments, ranging from grants to bonds to loans and de-risking mechanisms of a variety of types. Next slide, please. So from an assessment of the different flows, an average of, so if we distinguish between the climate-specific flows of finance, around 3.2 billion a year between 2013 and 2017 have been sort of allocated to the ASEAN region. If we also look at other projects, for example, the ones that contain a part of that are partially climate relevant, this goes up to 6 billion a year in the same period. Next slide, please. So the operational entities under the UNFCCC have approved overall around 222 million in commitments to projects in ASEAN since 2010. However, it is really noticeable that in the last couple of years, there has been a massive increment in sourcing from, in particular, the GCF, and only in the last couple of years, an additional 263 million worth projects from the GCF have been allocated. There are also around sort of over 200 million channeled through multi-country projects that include one of the ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. And in terms of beneficiary countries, 3 countries in the region, Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia, have received over 82% of climate-related development finance between 2013 and 2017. And the sort of vast majority of these allocations have flowed through multilateral and climate funds. Next slide, please. So between 2013 and 2017, around 60% of the finance was directed to climate mitigation projects. However, in the last few years, this allocation has sort of moved slightly more towards adaptation, so towards a more balanced allocation between mitigation and adaptation. Perhaps sort of before 2016, the allocation to adaptation was between 15 to 32%, but this has increased to up to around 47, sort of less than 50%, still less than 50%, but the allocation has increased considerably. Next slide, please. In terms of instruments, the sort of bilateral flows of finance usually favor concessional debt. And whilst more grants have been allocated to adaptation projects proportionally, this is sort of in line with the fact that adaptation projects are sort of more of a public good element, and usually are more it is more challenging to attract private capital. So it is still necessary to allocate grants to these type of projects proportionally. Next slide, please. So in terms of sector distribution, we can see that in terms of mitigation, the energy, transport, and a bit further down, the AFOLU sector have been sort of receiving the vast majority of flows of finance. In terms of adaptation, the majority have been sort of dedicated to disaster risk reduction, water and sanitation, and AFOLU. Of course, there are cross-cutting sectors that receive both one and the other, such as sort of transport and sort of the AFOLU sectors. Yes, next slide, please. We have, yeah, we can go to the next one. So in addition to international sources of finance, it is sort of also well known that domestic public finance has a very important role to play in supporting climate ambition. Expenditures may be through national, subnational levels, and can support sort of can be in the form of public expenditures, procurement and subsidies that can really incentivize the rollout of different technologies and services. There are 3 member states, Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia, who have been implementing the UNDP methodology for climate public expenditure institutional reviews, which has been sort of originally developed by the UNDP. The methodologies usually are quite different, and there are also sort of, and the differences are also related to the different government budgeting systems and the approaches, and sort of also approaches in dealing, for example, with mitigation and adaptation financing. But in general, the sort of the percentage of GDP that has been sort of allocated to climate finance is between 3 and 6%. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Thank you. In addition to international and domestic sources of finance, we have also looked at domestic sort of private sources of finance. It is also quite well known that private sources of finance are quite difficult to track, but they originate predominantly from project developers and corporations that provide debt and equity to climate projects, for example, up to households that are contributing finance, for example, through saving investments. Market capitalization is usually quite limited, with the exception of a few countries. Liquidity also tends to be quite low. The equity market is quite is sort of quite volatile. There are, as I mentioned, it's quite challenging to capture the private sources of finance, whilst renewable energy project finance is the one that we have been focusing mostly on because of the relatively higher degree of availability of data. There have been sort of 5 billion a year allocated in terms of renewable energy project finance in the region. There has been an incredible increase in the last sort of couple of years, around 2018, due to Vietnam's solar investments. If we can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So this section looks at the climate finance needs and priorities. As Yolanda mentioned, we have sort of gone through pretty much all the possible documentation from NDCs, BURs, national communications to identify what are the major needs and priorities of the region. If we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. And we can skip this and go to the next one. Great, thank you. We have we have the understanding that around 3 trillion in additional green investment between 2016 and 2030 have been required. Predominantly in terms of electricity grid, renewable energy development, energy efficiency, and agriculture and land use. And the document goes into quite a lot of detail on all of these needs. So I just wanted to give a sort of an overview of the approach and the sort of high level financial needs. Next slide, please. We have also been collating a number of sort of enabling environment needs, both as part of the conversations that we had during the last workshop in Manila, and have sort of identified 3 areas of needs on access to finance, from NDC strengthening, cross-border flows, etc. A number of capacity needs, which we have sort of structured around financial technology, research and awareness, institutional and planning. And the technology needs, with the understanding that 4 countries have also included specific technology needs in their NDCs. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail here, and it's because it's quite detailed in the document. Next slide, please. The next 2 slides are sort of an assessment of the priority, both mitigation and adaptation sectors that have been identified in the major documents by each member state. We have sort of identified priorities across the region in terms of mitigation. These are energy, transport, and forestry and land use. Where sort of the vast majority of the countries have indicated these as priority sectors. Similarly, in adaptation, these have been water supply and sanitation, public health, biodiversity, forestry, watershed management, food security, and coastal zone protection and marine sources. Yes, I think this sort of provides a broad overview in terms of guidance for further assessment of the document. And I think I can pass on to Grant.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome from my side. As you may have seen me before, also having joined Lando in meetings in the Philippines, and it's great to see you all and to hear from you. I'm just going to run through very quickly the last 2 chapters of the technical annex on sources and instruments. Obviously, what we're trying to do here is give you a bit of a taste of the document, and we're sure that you've read it, but it's more of a sort of a taster of what's to be read and what you can find there. And I should also mention that the data itself is probably starting to become a little bit dated, in the sense that a lot of this analysis that Federica has done and we have done here as well is a snapshot in time up to a point of around the first quarter this year. And as you can imagine, things are moving forward. So you'd find that some of the information may already be a little bit old and things have moved on. And the other thing I should mention too, which I think Lando touched on as well, is that we've had a big change in global issues, as you know, with the pandemic. And of course, milestones and achievables and priorities, of course, are also being re-looked at, and the impact thereof are still to be felt. And that this hasn't really been reflected in the document. So we're looking forward to feedback from you on this in the Q&A session. So I'll be very short, and I'll just mention that the next slide, please, Jens, outlines what you'll find in the document, which speaks about the major dedicated climate funds, the MDBs, and it also goes into, I haven't detailed it here, but a whole bunch of bilateral sources as well, which you'll find in the document. We'll just touch on one or two things which are quite important to note. Overall, Green Climate Fund, next slide, please. Project approval for the region at the time we took the data was 8 approved projects, committing about 300 million, mostly from 3 countries, 65% of which was co-financed, and only about 10% of that funding had been dispersed at the time we looked at it. There are further projects in the pipeline, and in particular, Brunei, Malaysia, and Singapore have not made use of any GCF funding as of to date. There is also text on the readiness support program from the GCF in the body there, and I think at the time about 25 million of readiness support has been provided to the region. Brunei and Singapore have not made use of readiness there either. I might also add that only 3 ASEAN countries have developed GCF country programs. This may be an area further to be looked at. Thailand, Laos, and Indonesia have done so, outlining some key priorities there that are shown in the slide. The other operating entity of the financial mechanism, of course, is the Adaptation Fund. Here we have for the region at the time, next slide, please, 4 approved projects to the tune of about 24 million. These are mostly being implemented by UN agencies, as you can imagine, in Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar. There are further 14 in the pipeline to the tune of 45 million. As I say, this data is somewhat dated, so we may find that it's changed a bit. Indonesia being the most active in the region using Adaptation Fund, and no readiness grants have been approved. There is only one agency for readiness grant, national implementation agency for as an accredited agency for the region, which is situated in Indonesia, something else to look at. Move on to the next slide, the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. Here also GEF grants to the tune of around 600 million, which have resulted in co-financing of an order of magnitude higher, or two orders certainly. Philippines making use of a significant portion of that, followed by Vietnam and Indonesia. And then on the smaller funds, the LDCF, SECF, we've also indicated which countries have made use of what and for what in the document. And on the SCCF, as you can imagine, there are now only 2 windows open at the moment on that which could be used, which are active on tech transfer and adaptation. Cambodia and Laos PDR have received funding for capacity building on transparency from the CBIT. An opportunity here too from the GEF side would be a discussion around replenishment depending on priorities, as we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, big changes due to the pandemic, that may be something to look at as a pillar. And then, of course, MDB or multilateral sources, as you can imagine. Next slide, please. Two major agencies we've listed in the document, ADB and the World Bank. The World Bank has two facilities, the NDC Support Facility, and also has several other funds. The World Bank has one facility we've highlighted there, and of course several other specialized funds and products. And then the ADB having two specific committed facilities for climate finance, the NDC Advance and the ASEAN Catalytic Finance Facility, which is designed for crowding in private sector. They've made large commitments for climate finance up to 2030. At least 75% need to be climate finance of the 80 billion they've committed so far. I might also add here too that maybe in addition to the document would be useful to include perhaps the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is now considered as the second largest MDB in the world, with 102 members, 52 of which are outside of Asia. So quite a large bank, having financed already around $19 billion in 87 projects. It's open to all countries, of course, specializing, of course, on infrastructure, resilience infrastructure modeled on, and then there is also, they opened up just recently a special fund for COVID-19 recovery to the tune of $30 billion, which is also open to all members. So summarizing chapter 5 quickly, low levels of participation of the fund programming, as we mentioned, low levels of disbursement, intermediate use of readiness, the paucity of readiness agencies, predominance of UN agency implementation, so more need to look at how to mobilize and bring in co-finance institutions, and then opportunities in terms of replenishment maybe there. Moving on to the last chapter, which I'll just touch on very quickly, instruments and mechanisms. We've gone into looking at what instruments and mechanisms are available in the region, are being used now. Just highlighting a few here: blended and sustainable finance, bonds, of course, national development banks, carbon markets, and standards, etc. There are national development banks in the region. Next slide, next slide, please. Jump one. And the one which we're highlighting here happens to be an Indonesian bank, which has been very, very successful here, owned and run by the Ministry of Finance, state-owned, but also Malaysia and Philippines have established similar banks. They understand the local conditions, they understand the risk aspect, and they're able to form partnerships, providing technical assistance, financing, and specialized funding for specific needs in the case of PTSMI, geothermal support here. Next slide, please. On the private sector side, there is quite a lot of work happening with, for example, PFAN, which is quite an interesting organization set up and run by under UNIDO. Here they've mobilized to date about $1.5 billion over the last 10 years. Just opened up an office in Thailand, have representation in 13 countries in the region, and are aiming to do at least 250 million per year, a threefold increase in mobilizing and attracting private finance. What they do is they basically put expertise into governments, into regions to help structure and crowd in finance there. So they're working, of course, with USAID and many others. There are also some very interesting funds available from philanthropy. One here that's mentioned and also in the document is the Asia Natural Capital Design Funding Window, funded through the RS Group out of Hong Kong. And then there are, of course, many other tools and instruments like credit enhancements from GuarantCo and specific national funds for crowding in and or helping private sector in the region. Next slide, please. Racing through green bonds, of course, a theme that is mentioned in the document, can't be ignored. And here we're referring to sovereign green bond issuance, not corporate. So issuance of debt by countries, known as sovereign green debt, And here we've seen issuances, successful, I should say, benchmark issuances from Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, with programs by those governments, in particular Singapore and I believe Thailand too, supporting a green bond issuance at the corporate side in particular, and laying down through the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum also rules and regulations and requirements for green bond issuance, which are quite forward-thinking and modeled certainly on international standards. Next slide, please. And then last but not least, obviously carbon markets, or let's say carbon finance in this case. Several countries looking at this very in detail, obviously with support from, for example, the World Bank, the PMR, Indonesia in particular establishing an MRB system, Philippines are considering a national domestics instrument. Then there's the carbon tax in Singapore, which is already implemented. And Thailand already has a voluntary system in place. Vietnam is developing possibly a pilot crediting system for the steel and waste sector. And then we've also highlighted in the document finance market initiatives. So, for example, we've spoken a bit about the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, what they're doing in terms of developing wider, deeper capital markets in the region. We've got some mention there of agricultural credit associations, which has been very active in helping finance agriculture and forestry credit. So that's detailed also in the document, providing some examples. I must say that it's a wide and deep region with a lot going on, and the document basically just gives you a slight injection into what's going on in the region. It's not covering everything. So if there's anything missing, please do highlight it. We want to try and encapsulate it and make it a full complement. So in summarizing that last chapter, we are seeing throughout the region a diverse set of instruments and mechanisms, of course. Not all are known and accessible. Strong national focus, of course. And there is opportunities for increasing co-financing with the private sector, including also private equity, something the infrastructure bank I mentioned is doing quite strongly now. And building reliance on a wider set of instruments, for example, as we mentioned, the bonds, regional market mechanisms, and climate resilient infrastructure. I'll stop there and hand back to Lendo. Or
Yes.
Up to Jens, sorry.
The questions, the guide questions.
Yes, we have a couple of guide questions here. So that's the last slide. As I was iterating throughout the discussion, we'd like to hear from you on are there any other informations missing or areas that could be focused upon to inform that needs to go into the document to inform the strategy. So please highlight those, please let us know. What in the technical assessment document is pointing towards where the strategy should go, and we've tried to highlight that in the discussion this afternoon now in the presentation. But you may want to say, okay, look, we're seeing it in a different light, or maybe there's some areas we've missed. So this would help to inform the design of the strategy. And then, as Lando mentioned, the ASEAN strategy is a common strategy for the region. So what actions we're looking to see, what actions could be jointly pursued by the community to address the needs and priorities that Federica has mentioned, that we've been able to distillate out of all of the public submissions to the UNFCCC. And then what elements should be included finally as core, let us say, pillars or anchors that the strategy should be based on. So these are the sort of questions we're waiting or wanting to hear from you now in the feedback session. Handing back to Jens. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. So as mentioned before, we'd be happy to see your questions and feedback in the chat, or ideally if you could just raise your hand. So there is the little hand raise button in your control panel. and would be happy to get a first round of feedback. And I think Yolando, if I can ask you then to give the floor to participants that raised their hand. I don't see anyone yet.
Hello. Hello.
Okay, Mr. Sunti.
Okay, thank you.
Take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, all the speaker, and it's a very comprehensive information. First, I would like to thank the UNFCCC Secretariat in Bonn, especially Yolando, for this effort in to support the project for ASEAN finance need-based. Just one question to Yolando, because we also, I think, maybe not only Cambodia, but Laos and Myanmar is also part of LDCs. And I have seen that we also work with LDC, the least developed country. Currently is Bhutan to implement this project. Whether it is overlap or what is different project. That is one. And second, you may know the UNSCAP and JICA or COICA, Korean, also implement a number of project finance climate finance support for I see for ASEAN, I see Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Indonesia. Myanmar also participate in this project. So I think it should be a synergy with this new initiative that has been discussed with the UNSCAP and COICA. I did not see in your presentation you mentioned about support from COICA and UNSCAP for this. So this may be the one of the to answer your first question. So thank you very much. I will have another comment if yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sunti. Yolando Grant, do you want to respond briefly on maybe the COICA?
Yeah, just to respond to Sunti's two questions. First, with regards to the overlap of the needs-based finance project. For example, in the case of some of the ASEAN countries are part also of the LDCs in Asia. There are groups of countries like LDCs, Arab or SIDS that overlap with regional groupings. But we are pursuing the project from the perspective that, for example, Cambodia, Myanmar, and other LDCs in Southeast Asia are part of Southeast Asia and take part in the identifications of needs and priorities in the context of Southeast Asia. But at the same time, taking part in LDCs in Asia where you have common interest with other LDCs in the region, with Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and others. We also encourage countries to take part either as a regional or part of a regional group or as part of the interest group. So, for example, some of the SEEDS countries are also taking part in the Pacific or taking part in Africa. The same with the Arab countries, where it encompasses both North Africa and Western Asia. So we don't see any conflict with overlaps, and as a matter of fact, that even enhances the mobilization of finance for these countries that take part in either as interest groups or as part of region. With regards to your second question with COICA, JICA, and even other initiatives, again, the project is very clear that it catalyzes the outcome of this project and even the strategy itself in terms of bringing together the different initiatives. So, for example, for COICA, since ESCAP is taking the lead with that project, and that project doesn't cover the whole of ASEAN countries. It only covers a small group of ASEAN countries. But still, we are collaborating with ESCAP for that project. And as a matter of fact, based on our discussions with ESCAP, since the project is still to be launched, that the outcomes of this project feed into the work of ESCAP with COICA. And it's the same with JICA. I am closely in contact with Koji, who is online, in terms of areas where we can collaborate. So, for example, in terms of their regional training, we provide inputs to that, and even the technical work that they are undertaking. So there are exchanges, both in terms of activities, collaboration, in terms of the technical work. Again, and I'm sure the objective of the other institutions and initiatives in the region is to help countries in the region mobilize finance. And we will continue to do that, both in terms of our work and in terms of the outcomes later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolando. I see a hand raised by Sofina.
Hello, hi, thanks Jens, and thank you to the UNFCCC colleagues for the excellent presentation. I have two questions. The first one is referring to the concept note of the ASEAN Climate Finance Strategy. One of the proposed activities is a compilation of best practices on climate change financing management in the region. And we would like to know where this particular section fits in the technical assessment document. And our second question is, when can we expect this document to be finalized? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sofina. Yolando, do you want to respond?
Thanks, Sofina, for that question. In terms of the best practices, we didn't include the best practices here in this document, given that this is still a draft, and we also want to hear from you and the rest of the member states of ASEAN in terms of where your priorities are, both on needs and also in terms of the supply. Once the region is able to identify that this is our priority and this is where we want to see in terms of mobilizing different sources of finance from international public, from the private sector, from the different mechanisms, then we would be able to target those best practices based on what you've identified as areas for action. Yeah, I don't know whether, was there a second question? So I hope I've answered your. Oh, in terms of the timing, later on Jens will provide an overview of the next steps for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolando. And I see two more raised hands, but first was through the chat, ASEAN Secretariat. Dr. Fong, you requested the floor.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Yolando, for your comprehensive information. My quick question is about to check with you about your methodology for this assessment in order to identify the need and priority. I mean, I understood you use mainly the secondary data or existing data information from available sources. But my simple question, rather you have any chance to talk to the funding institution or the recommendation from those funding institutions, such as priority and key focus area and so on and so forth. I think the need or the priority from that agency is really important for us as well to know what are their area of interest or geographic focus and so on and so forth. Otherwise, we just see a general picture, but when it comes to a question of access to those finance, it creates some difficulty because we don't understand what their key priority in let's say next 5 years, what are their key priority from the sector focus, from geographic focus, from a group population focus. So that is one thing. I think at least we should get some picture from those people in order to match with the need and the priority of the ASEAN region from both sides, mitigation and adaptation of climate change. So just seek your clarification first. The floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yolando, Grant, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dr. Vomsuk. With regards to the profile and priorities of the funding institutions, I think we've tried to map it by having the sources, so mainly from the convention side and also the multilateral, but definitely we will be able to expand that information the moment that we start moving into the development of pipeline projects. Currently, I think doing a more comprehensive profile of the different institutions without targeting any of those institutions may not help the project or the countries when developing the project. So that's one. So later on, once you've identified the needs, priorities, where possible sources, and as I mentioned earlier, best practices, and also profiles of these institutions. But I think as a matter of principle, and this is what the convention is saying and what the decision and the mandate for this project is all about, that instead of the countries adjusting to the priorities of the financial institutions, ideally, the financial institution should be more responsive to the needs and priorities of the countries. So it's not the other way around. And that was the context on why the conference of the parties insisted that climate finance should be based on the needs of the developing countries and not what the different financial institutions identify as their priorities. But having said that, indeed, we will provide those profile once we move into strategy development and pipeline development. Grant?
Yeah, maybe I would just add to that too. It is really a really good question because it points to what we're trying to do here, and that is give the power back to you, as Lando said, in the sense that you can express as members of ASEAN what are the immediate needs now, but without duplicating, for example, current strategic programming that you have already got in place with some of the banks anyway. And we mentioned also in the intervention that there's only 3 countries with strategic programs with the GCF. I'm sure that there are many other strategic programs with other banks, but it would be somewhat odd if we were to provide you back with those strategic programs from all those banks and say, okay, this is your strategy. But in actual fact, what we should be doing here is saying, guys, this is what you've already decided, but what is it that you really need now? What is new? What can be put into a regional strategy that's not already covered by a strategic program? And if there isn't a strategic program done by the country with a bank, well, then maybe that could be part of the strategy itself, is what do we need to do to put a strategic program in place? How can readiness be mobilized from the GCF and other agencies to actually help us put together a strategic program so that the power is back in the hands of the need and not the donor, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda and Grant. I see 2 more raised hands, Koji and Noel. I don't know in which order you raised hands, but maybe we start with Koji.
Okay, thank you, Yen, and good to see you again. Since Yolanda mentioned my name, so let me also comment. 2 comments, specific comments. One is just building on comments made by Grant earlier. I would suggest assessment take into account the impact of COVID-19 as well, because I'm convinced that the general direction and the principle enshrined in the Paris Agreement will not remain unchanged. However, I would suspect all the needs of priorities and perhaps the financial landscape in the short term might be impacted by this external shock. Therefore, and in this line of context, I think there are lots of impact assessment, economic impact assessment made by like relevant institutions like ADB or ASCAP in the region. So I would suggest that this assessment take into those results of those assessment in the first place. And second point is that in order for this technical assessment to be a little more handy to AMS and the stakeholders, I would like to see more on the concrete case studies on the sources and the tools that just introduced, how they are actually utilized in the region. And as mentioned by Yolanda, in our project also, we're working closely with the TGO to basically launch this also assessment stocktake of domestic financing options, particularly in the context of Thailand, for example. We're looking into the different financial options, like a domestic fund available in the country, and like other financial instruments offered by the commercial banks and market mechanism tools, and to see how those tools are actually accessible and what are the barriers, from the perspective of the users, but not only users, but also from the providers. So those are sort of more concrete reality on the ground. I think it would put more strength to the assessment. And I know there are limitations to the assessment. So if you cannot do that by yourself, then we are very much happy to complement each other. So let's keep our conversation rolling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koji. And as I said, another raised hand here by Noel, and Albert next after Noel, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. My question is actually the first question raised by Koji as well on the changes in priorities because of this pandemic. So the fundamental strategies will still be there, but there will be change in priorities both on the country side and the fund provider side. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Yolando, Grant, you want to respond first?
Yeah. Grant?
No.
Okay. I'll probably start by thanking both Noel and Kochi for the feedback with regards to the inclusion of the current crisis with regards to the assessment. Grant already indicated that earlier, and definitely this strategy cannot ignore the condition of the region with regards to the crisis. The only question there, though, is that since this is relatively new, how do we scope that assessment in a way that it would still be close to climate finance? Because easily the COVID-19 crisis is definitely more urgent and large in terms of scale over the short term. And so scoping the assessment, looking at both what is short term and long term, how will this impact work on climate, and which areas will be impacted, or areas where there are opportunities for actions that can be jointly undertaken in the context of COVID and in the context of climate. And as a matter of fact, there are indeed some studies coming up right now in terms of the issues around the resiliency, issues around the health, food security, and others. So that's probably something that we can look forward. And we hope that if you know of any studies that are linked between the link between COVID-19 and the climate and climate finance, it would really help us work on that one. Thanks, Koji. Your last statement, I understand. I got it as an offer for us to work on the case studies, and we would welcome very much collaborating with JICA on the case studies. Also, given that you have a strong presence in the region and has worked on climate finance for a while, but indeed having more concrete studies in terms of sources, delivery, instruments, I think would further enhance the technical assessment and also the strategy that the region will adopt later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Yolando. And before giving it to Albert, there was a question in the chat by Tony that is directly related to the case study. So, Yolando, we understand you correctly that by cooperating with Koji on the case studies, that these could also be incorporated into the capacity building part of the technical assessment?
Yes, but with regards to the collaboration, I was just assuming from Koji's statement, but I hope to hear confirmation from Koji on that side.
Okay, so we will get back to it when working on the document. So, Albert, I think you tried to share your screen. Could you please just try it again?
No, actually, yes.
You
yes,
just come in. Okay.
No, yeah, it was. I was looking for the raise hand icon. That's why I was clicking at the wrong icons. Anyway, I'm not going to share my screen, but I'd like to share some my comments on the technical assessment paper document, especially on the methodology that that as presented by Federica and Lando, that the climate needs and priorities should be in accordance with the NDCs, as well as the national adaptation plans. And as part of the methodology, the technical assessment document would, as mentioned, that the access to climate finance can be via both public and private sector portfolios. My concern really is how can we, allow the entry of the private sector in accessing the climate finance, especially considering that the most NDC options that we have identified would be operationalized or would be implemented in partnership or fully by the private sector. In fact, in the Philippines, we're looking at having the NDC operationalization of NDC. I mean the conversion or the transformation of NDC options into business models. So it is a necessity to really facilitate the entry of the private sector in this, in delivering or in implementing our NDCs. So perhaps the narrative in the next draft of the technical assessment would also mention this, the entry points for the private sector. That's all, Jens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Albert, very much. Yolando, would you like to come back? That was more input.
Yeah, thanks, Albert. Grant here again. That's very good feedback. And it's certainly going to be very important to build those hooks into the document now with that clarity you've provided. So thank you for that. We have made some attempt to do that, but a deeper dive into, as Koji's even said, some case studies, and in particular your work on transformation of NDCs into business models would be very useful as one of those case studies. So please do share that with us if you could, and we will be very happy to build those in and have that in the document. Thank you.
Now, just to add with regards to the private sector, I think the entry point for the private sector is not so much about access to finance, but more of the enabling policies and enabling environments being put forward by the governments. And this is where I think during the workshop, Ed Thompson and Noel and others presented good case studies on their work at FIAP and also the work of WWF in terms of engaging the regulatory agencies of the government. So I think if there will be a focus on the entry point for the private sector, it would be around the fiscal policies, regulations, and other incentives being provided by the government for an active engagement by the private sector. To some extent, in terms of access, there are limited windows being provided by multilateral institutions and to some extent bilateral institutions for private sector. So for example, the private sector facility of the GCF, Jeff also has its window, ADB, World Bank and others. But my sense is that the private sector engagement would be would be enhanced from regulatory and policy incentives. Thanks.
Thank you, Yolando. And we have another comment here from ASEAN Secretariat, Dr. Fong. I know there are others, but I assume this may be directly in response to the private sector. Dr. Fong, you want to take the floor again?
No, I'm not meant to the private sector. If you want to continue private sector, I give the floor back to you. But I want to have my follow-up question about this sort of the overall sort of assessment. So if you focus on private sector, I give the floor back to the meeting.
Thank you. No, I thought that was maybe your intention because you came in again. So I will just follow then the order in the chat because we had one question raised here by Tony from Singapore. Question. I'll just read it out and we'll take them in the order of the chat. Question on paragraph 5A of the document. It calls for strategy to serve as a commitment. Is the strategy intended to be binding? Yolando Grant, I want to respond on this.
The strategy itself is well, based on our experience with other regions. It's more to guide the mobilization and access of financing by the region. So at the very least, it will serve to guide. In other regions, there are efforts to use it as a basis for closer collaboration among countries. So I'm not sure whether you call it binding or not, but I think it's more of using it as a tool for collaboration.
Thank you, Yolando. And we are a couple minutes over, but we also still have a number of questions here. I think we may just continue a little bit. There's little left other than this question and answer session. So there was one more comment from Tawa Chai from TGO, who mentioned in the chat, climate finance for climate capacity building seems to be less mentioned here. It should be elaborated more in the strategy because ASEAN really needs more support on this issue. And then the request to share the file. I think we noticed that some of you had problems with the file. It's pretty large. We will try to compress it a little bit and recirculate it also after the meeting. So I guess that was more a comment and a request to include more on capacity building, less a question. Good. The silence I interpret as your agreement. So I think my colleagues will take care of this and take your input into account. Then a question here from Ed. I noticed not much finance needs data is shown for Philippines. Are financing needs for Philippines premised on submissions of NDCs? And maybe Federica, would you be able to come back on this one, or I'll give it to Yolando as well.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for this. In terms of the finance needs, so specifically finance needs, we have sort of scoped a number of documents. Within the document, we have indicated some of the countries that have specifically mentioned sort of a finance figure in their NDC. And also sort of if there are other documentation that can present this, we have indicated as much as we could. However, if anyone thinks that there isn't an adequate representation of this, please do let us know. If you have any specific documents that we can refer to, that would be really, really useful. So again, sort of an open welcome to all the member states to provide more specific documentation on this, and also in terms of the capacity building question comment before. We have, I mean, capacity building is so all-encompassing and sort of looks at so many different sectors and activities. We have tried to bring all the needs that we could identify together and structure them in a way that can reflect some of the enabling environment components. And looking at also, you know, for example, cross-cutting activities that are carried out across the region. But if there's anything, again, also linked to case studies on this, if there's anything that you think could help us in the assessment, please send us documentation or comments or emails. Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. Another comment we received here from Sheila from Malaysia. The technical assessment could also include few initiatives related to climate finance launched recently, for example, the Finance Minister Coalition on Climate Action and International Platform on Sustainable Finance by European Commission. Few Asian member states already participated in these coalitions. So I think that's a comment, more than a question. But I think my colleagues will. Do you want to respond, Yolando, Federica, Grant, or can we just take it as an
No, I think the point raised with regards to the coalition is important, and also with connecting it later on with Vic's comments with regard to sustainable financing initiative by ADFIAP. This is an area, I think, in this document that we can further enhance in terms of the enabling policies, regulations, and all the initiatives in the region on this one, and linking them into the private sector engagement. So yes, definitely we will include those initiatives by the coalition. By the way, the UNFCCC Secretariat is actively involved in the coalition of finance ministers. Thanks.
Thank you, Yolando. And then we had at least, I see one remaining question. That was the follow-up question by Dr. Fong. So Dr. Fong, would you like to take the floor again?
Thank you very much to the team again. I think to well note your points about this need-based assessment. So of course it need to identify the need from the AMS, and then is the way feedback to the or share the recommendation or whatever come out of this assessment to those involved in the finance matter. So with this, I think one of my follow-up point on the identify the priority from the finance institution. This become an opportunity for ASEAN member state, for the sector within ASEAN, for the private sector, whoever involved in this sort of green investment or climate investment, so they can take the opportunity directly. So I believe the way assessment come out, maybe the clear identified sort of opportunity for different target group. So with this, I would like to ask the team maybe consider, or I also would like to see at the end of the assessment, good recommendation that more pragmatic about regional sort of aspect. What would be the opportunity for regional with this sort of assessment in terms of need based and access to finance, and also with respect to AMS, because there are different sort of priority focus to AMS, and ASEAN consists of different level of economic status, from least developed to advanced or well-developed country. So this may be specific opportunity, even Brunei and Singapore, maybe some opportunity there as well in terms of strengthening the with the private sector and so on. So that's the way I would like to see. And with the key recommendation, I would like to encourage also the team to maybe reflect after talking to the funding agency and so on, to find the way how to feedback to them as well, because it's well noted your point that it's need-based from ASEAN, but it's so far the partner, they have the finance institution, they have their own priority, their own focus as well. So they just find way around to get endorsement from a concerned party. But I mean, if we can have this sort of good comprehensive assessment to feedback for them in terms of well consider for distribute and prioritize according to the member state, it's really a must, I think. That is the way we can match from the demand and supply side. And last point, but also that is maybe part of access to the finance, maybe the opportunity maybe the AMS talk to also the finance institution kind of workshop or whatever at the end of this sort of assessment to see what is the real concrete case that we can discuss and understand what their support, what would be the opportunity, how to progress further from this key recommendation. So I end my intervention at this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fong. Yolando, Grant, Federica, would you like to come back one more time? There is another question from Vic, but I think Yolando has answered it already. Then there are no more hands or comments. We are also 15 minutes over. So team in Bonn and London, would you like to come back one more time before we go to the proposed next steps?
Yeah, Jens, I'll probably start by thanking Dr. Vuong for those comments and suggestions. And indeed, that would be a useful next step in terms of where do we lead this work. We will discuss further details and get further feedback from ASEAN Secretariat in terms of giving us guidance on that document that Dr. Vuong mentioned about the opportunity for regional access, private sector engagement, and even the enabling environments and policy. So these are more focused type of work. The technical assessment, as you've noticed, is a broader assessment of climate finance in the region, and based on that, if the follow-up can actually be more focused towards where these priorities are, including capacity building, access, delivery, specific sectors like the private sector, highlighting best case on these different sources. So that might actually be a good way forward in terms of the next steps. And we will definitely seek guidance from the ASEAN Secretariat and the member states in terms of the usefulness of this document. Just a final point from my side, and going back to the point that Grant earlier mentioned, that indeed this is a living document, and we hope that by the time that we finalize this document, we will be able to update the data and information in this draft, including, for example, the NDCs that countries are submitting, and also the NAPs that countries are developing. So we hope that we will have the latest information on NDCs, NAPs, and other documents reflected in here, including, for example, the latest flows reported by OECD in just this year, so that we will be able to provide you with a good analysis of the state of climate finance in the region, and at the same time provide you with a vision of a more detailed vision of what's next based on the different suggestions you've made at this session. Thank you so much from my side, and handing over to Grant.
Yeah, also just to say thank you very much from my side. It's been wonderful, and looking forward to all of the good feedback.
Over to you, Jens.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Yolando. Federica, do you also want to say a few words at the end of the session?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Also on my side, it's been really, really insightful. We will collate both these comments and further comments that we really welcome you to provide on the specific document. So that will make it a lot easier for us to identify the focus points, some of which Lando has just mentioned. And it is I think there are some things that will sort of remain the same. The fact that this work has been carried out in a number of months, and also including the specific, very sort of challenging times with COVID, will mean that some of the priorities, yes, will change. We'll also need to make sort of an assessment on how much we'll need to change for this document to be both factual in the moment in which we produce it, and also useful as a source for the improvement of mobilization of finance. So a bit of a trade-off between completeness and updating of the document itself. But sort of we look forward in particular to completing this particular phase, so we can move on to the part in which we bring all of these priorities together in a strategic framework. So yes, thank you so much from my side, and looking forward to continuing the engagement with all of you.
Thank you very much, Federica. So let me see if I can open the slides again. Meanwhile, also, of course, thank you very much for everyone who has provided input, for your participation. And we are far beyond the 4 o'clock, but I'm so sorry to keep you in this call for so long, but I think we had a lot of good inputs, and we wanted to take the chance to actually respond to all of it. And of course, we will also record the input and then take it further. And I hope you can see my screen, because there's just one slide before I hand over to the ASEAN Secretariat to close this session. The proposed next steps. So we have asked you to provide your written feedback by the 14th of August, which may be a bit tight for some of you, because we noticed that the document was very large, and you may not have received it, or your email wasn't able to open. So we will resend it, and 14th August, that would be by the end of the week. Of course, we welcome all feedback that's provided, but I guess we will also be able to take some feedback by early next week as well. And then the next steps are actually, the team will continue to work on this document to produce a final draft of this technical assessment by September, and then by October, work on the draft climate finance strategy will happen, so that this can also be shared again. Of course, with feedback will be needed from all of you again. So these steps are still relatively clear, especially the timeline. But then after October, and you all know, we have planned a validation workshop. It was actually supposed to be to happen much earlier this year, and due to the pandemic situation, that wasn't possible. We do need a physical workshop, or are of the opinion that the climate finance strategy can really only be discussed in a physical setting. So we're still hoping to be able to have such a physical workshop, but the timeline is still to be confirmed, and we are in contact with the ASEAN Secretariat, also with partners, and see if and how we can plan such a workshop. But you will hear more in the coming months when we are able to confirm the date. And then for early next year, or the first half of next year, the resource mobilization as the third and last phase of the project is planned. I think we will just continue to communicate these timelines. Also, we'll ask the ASEAN Secretariat to share any updates with you. And with this, again, I would just like to thank you and hand over to ASEAN Secretariat to close the session. Thank you very much.
So we come to the end. Thank you very much to everyone. Particularly, thank you to the need-based assessment team for your great work. I see a lot of information and hard work. Particularly, thank to Zen, Lando, Grant, Frederica, Albert, and Sofina for your support always. And thanks for all the input that share with the assessment team. I mean, we all recognize we are very difficult situation with this sort of constraint and disruptions of the COVID-19, but we still can manage this productively from the feedback that we receive. But I mean, the feedback and the input may not be enough during this time. So as Zan just mentioned, I mean, the opportunity is still until the 14th of August. So I would like to encourage AMA to provide any input or feedback to the consult team to make them adjust or fix or correct and further fine-tune the assessment paper. And so we look forward the document, the final document in September, and the strategy in October, and we look forward also a physical face-to-face meeting to get this sort of more interactive discussion on climate finance strategy, as well as an opportunity to bring the finance institution to be part of the solution as well, so that we can understand each other better, and we can have a clear in terms of pathway to have a proper sort of demonstration project or activity after this assessment, and also the way also feedback to the partner in terms of how they can support better in the future. Thank you very much again to all of you, and I would like to end our session today, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.